All right, welcome back, everyone. We're jumping right into a brand new explainer today, and honestly, this one is going to completely shift how you view one of the ancient world's greatest wonders. We're ditching the folklore, we're ignoring the movie myths, and we are focusing strictly on the hard, data driven reality of ancient Egyptian pyramid construction. We're going to decode the awe inspiring numbers, the exact dates, the sheer number of kilometers traversed, and the incredibly complex demographics of the workers who actually pulled this off. If you're fascinated by how monumental tasks are achieved through sheer human willpower and organization, you are absolutely in the right place. Let's get into it. So here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to quickly run through the timeline of the kings, look at the millions of stones involved, the transport logistics across all those kilometers, the true workforce, and finally, completing the Great Pyramid itself.
Okay, part 1, Timeline of the Pyramid Kings. Let's look at the dates.
Now, you might be wondering when this all actually happened. And the thing to remember is this didn't happen overnight. It was a massive evolution. We start with the absolute start date around 2670 BC when King Djoser built the very first step pyramid at Saqqara. Fast forward to the mid-dates, the real zenith of this era at Giza, where Khufu kicked off his reign around 2589 BC, followed closely by Khafre around 2558 BC. But the timeline doesn't stop there. Way down at the end dates, around 664 BC, you have Kushite kings like Taharqa building pyramids down in modern-day Sudan. We're talking about a continuous architectural tradition spanning well over 2 millennia. What's really fascinating here is just seeing the sheer span of time and how many kings were involved in this legacy. Look at Sneferu, around 2612 BC. He built the Red Pyramid at Dashur, which totally paved the way for those smooth-sided pyramids we all know. And then, literally centuries later, King Paye built at El Cairo around 721 BC, becoming the first Egyptian pharaoh buried in a pyramid in centuries. It's a tradition sustained across hundreds of generations, involving dozens of kings across a massive geographic area. And to put this physical scale into perspective side by side at Giza, just look at these heights. Khufu's Great Pyramid towered at an original height of 146.7 meters. Just think about that. It literally held the record for the tallest man-made structure on Earth for over 3,800 years. Now, Khafre's pyramid might look taller today, but that's just a trick of the eye because it was built on higher ground. It actually sits at 136.4 meters. Menkaure rounds out the trio at 65 meters. The sheer verticality they achieved is absolutely staggering when you look at the raw data. But, Giza wasn't just a monument for the kings. It was a massive royal ecosystem. Surrounding these immense structures were smaller satellite edifices built for the queens. Seeing exactly how many queens, nobles, and high-ranking officials were buried here really points to this highly stratified society. Basically, your proximity to the pharaoh in death reflected your status in life. It's an entire sprawling complex of organized memory. All right, moving right along to part 2, millions of blocks and stones. I want you to just take a second and wrap your head around this number. 2.3 million. That is the estimated total number of stone blocks used just for the Great Pyramid of Khufu alone. We're not talking about easily liftable bricks. We're talking about massive, individually cut stones that had to be quarried, shaped, and perfectly fitted together. And here's the crazy part. Some of these individual stones weren't just big, they were absolute behemoths. The heaviest blocks used in the construction weighed up to an unbelievable 80 tons. No way, right? But it's true. These were massive granite blocks used for the king's burial chamber and the relieving chambers above it, specifically designed to distribute the immense, crushing weight of the pyramid above. So how do you even source 2.3 million blocks? Well, the Egyptians had a highly organized strategy. First, they used local nummulitic limestone right from the Giza Plateau for the inner core, kind of like the skeleton. Second, they grabbed fine, bright white limestone from the Tura quarries across the river to create that smooth, gleaming outer casing we used to see. And finally, that incredibly dense 80-ton granite, that had to be brought in from Aswan for the internal chambers. Which leads perfectly into part 3, transporting across many kilometers. Remember that Aswan granite we just talked about? Well, it had to be transported 800 kilometers down the Nile River. Think about the logistics of that for a second. Floating 80 tons of solid rock over 800 kilometers on a wooden barge. Over 4,500 years ago, it is just an unparalleled feat of transportation. And how did they get those heavy barges right up to the work site? They built the Basin of Khufu. They literally dug out a massive artificial harbor and a whole system of canals right at the base of the Giza Plateau. This connected the construction site directly to the Nile River, meaning ships could deliver stones right to the front door. This wasn't just a building project, it was a massive, landscape-altering infrastructure project. So let's look at the step-by-step process. First, workmen used heavy dolerite pounding stones and copper chisels to cut the rock. And since copper is pretty soft, only about a 3.75 on the hardness scale, they actually used sand to generate extra grinding friction. Super clever. Second, they shipped the blocks on those Nile barges during the flood season. Finally, for the land journey, they dragged the blocks on wooden sledges. And get this, to overcome the sliding friction, they poured water over the sand right in front of the sledge. This created droplets that bound the sand grains together, which actually reduced the pulling force required by nearly 50%. A total game changer.
Okay, part 4, the true Egyptian workforce. Let's talk about the people.
We need to completely bust a massive historical myth right here. Hollywood loves to tell us these monuments were built by an unorganized forced slave workforce, but modern archaeology completely dismantles that narrative. The reality? The pyramids were built by a highly organized, socially stratified workforce of free citizens. It was a permanent core of skilled master craftsmen engineers, supplemented by seasonal waves of conscript agricultural laborers who came into work during the Nile's flood season when farming was literally impossible. To put the sheer number of workers into perspective, peak estimates suggest that between 20,000 and 100,000 people were involved at any given time. That's a small city. They lived in nearby worker villages, and the evidence shows they received good nutrition, shelter, wages, and even medical care. It was the ultimate national project.
But you don't manage up to 100,000 workers without some serious executive leadership. Under the king, the logistics were overseen by high-ranking nobles. You had Hemiunu, Khufu's vizier, and the brilliant architect who oversaw the Great Pyramid's material sourcing. And later, figures like Enkhof, who was actually Khufu's half-brother, acting as the overseer of the harbor and the transport of those casing stones. These guys were essentially the CEOs of the ancient world. Now, let's zoom all the way in, from that macro 100,000 to the micro level. The workforce was divided into highly structured, tight-knit units. Ancient logbooks tell us a standard hauling team was just 40 men. One of these specific teams was led by a middle-ranking inspector named Mirror. Over a 5-month period, Mirror's 40-man team made about 10 round trips a month, transporting roughly 1,000 giant limestone blocks from the Tura quarries over to Giza. And we literally know all this because we have the receipts. The Diary of Mur is the oldest known papyri ever found, dating back 4,500 years to the 27th year of Khufu's reign. It reads, Inspector Mur casts off with his file from Tura South, loaded with stone for Aka Khufu, spends the night at Sheikh Khufu. These Red Sea Scrolls beautifully humanize the daily grind of the workers. They even named the Great Pyramid Aka Khufu, which translates to Horizon of Khufu. It just proves the exact logistics of their operations on a day-to-day basis. Finally, part 5, completing the Great Pyramid. After all that effort, the Great Pyramid took an estimated 10 to 20 years to fully complete. And the final precision is just mind-blowing. The base is aligned to within 0.05 degrees of true north. They pulled that off by tracking the rising and setting of stars, like those in Orion's belt. To lift the blocks up the pyramid, engineers likely used a system of straight, zigzag, or maybe even internal spiral ramps. They also used wooden rockers bound to the sides of the blocks to maneuver them into their final resting place with pinpoint accuracy, meaning they barely even needed mortar. Yet even with all the incredible data we've decoded today from the papyrus logs and the archaeological sites, some things remain breathtakingly elusive. How exactly did they achieve such flawless astronomical angles and perfect block alignment completely devoid of modern measuring instruments or computers? The dates, the workers, and the kilometers tell an incredible story of human logistics, for sure. But the sheer genius of their surveying, that remains a profound mystery. Definitely something to chew on the next time you look at a modern skyscraper. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep seeking out the data and keep learning.